Well, good morning. This should be interesting. I've set my camera up on my little stand here so I can work. And I wasn't even going to bother showing this because it's kind of a hassle to get the camera out and get it set up. But you only do this once, and it's somewhat of a hassle. And I think there's maybe somewhat of a learning curve on it. But of course, there's the crown. And these are what they call TIG welder's gloves, or tungsten inert gas welder's gloves. And these things are real important because years ago, at one time here, I can't show you. Here you go. I've got this monster soldering iron going here because this crown is brass. It takes a lot of heat to get this thing hot enough to add this solder, and I'll explain why we're putting the solder around the perimeter of this thing in just a minute. But it's a big piece of brass. It's already been somewhat patinaed with this dark brown finish. There'll be more finish going on over that, but I didn't need to tin this whole thing. Back years ago, we would have tinned the entire thing because we would want the patina, which is going to be on the solder, to be even or the same. This one we're doing a little bit different. Anyway, I've got this huge monster soldering iron here. It requires a lot of heat. And then I have a 100-watt Weller iron. It's called an SG100, means stained glass 100. Pretty much probably 90% of the people that do stained glass use that particular iron. So I'm kind of preheating this area a little bit here with that 100-watt iron. And then I've taken a Dremel tool there with a wire brush, and I've gone all the way around the perimeter of this thing, both the inside and the outside, to get that brown finish that was all the way out to the end off. And I wanted to get that clean so I can get this solder to adhere to the brass. And it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. Once you get the temperatures and everything just right, you don't need to be intimidated by this thing because you're not going to melt it with any of the soldering irons that we have here. It would take a lot of heat to melt that. So I began working on, pointing my finger that direction, I began working around this other side to get to here. Things are working real good for me now, so as I go on around and intersect the area that I started in, I'll probably come back around a little more to get tinned or some solder on the edge of this brass all the way around and get it real even, and then I'll turn it over and make sure I've got the inside. All right, why are we doing that? This crown is going to set in the top of that lamp form, and I'm not going to be moving this around because my camera's on a stand. But crown sets in the top of the lamp form, and then the lead branches and stuff will attach to the crown. There's glass and stuff that also will attach to the crown, and that glass has all been wrapped with copper foil. So I'm going to need to solder that glass and solder that branch. The branch is lead, but it's got a thin coating of copper on it. So of course the copper will just immediately work with the solder, as does the copper foil around the glass. So what we need to do is we need to build a layer, and it doesn't need to be thick, but just a thin layer of solder all the way around the perimeter of the crown on the top and the bottom. And that allows us to attach the glass and the branches. That's important because this crown holds the entire lamp up. So the entire perimeter of the top of the lamp, I don't think it's going to do me any good to be pulling pictures up here. We'll get it figured out. When I put the crown back on top of the lamp, you'll see what I'm talking about. But all of the glass for the whole shade is going to be attached to the edge of this crown. So it gets real important that this tinning be done properly so that when you get this thing going, oh, I've got some, come in. I'm doing a video here in just a minute, everybody. So anyway, we're going to solder around all the way around this. I'll do this a couple of minutes here, and then it's not going to be a long video. So just hang on. Okay, we've cleaned this area around the perimeter of the crown, and now we're just putting a little bit of flux on there. And then it's going to take a couple of minutes for this big iron to get this hot enough, and it's got a lot of heat, and I've preheated it with this iron over here, so this should work. I'll show you a couple of minutes of this, and then we'll bail out just to show you how it's done. But we've got the tinning around to there. Okay, let's Or not hot yet because we don't see the flux smoking. And you can see how hot the iron is. See it melt that solder. Okay, now the flux is starting to smoke, so it's getting pretty warm. Now what I do, right underneath here, there's some spatter solder that's dropped. And so I'll come back up and lay it up on top here. There you go. All right. And you're working around, and just adding a little solder in there. And let's see if we can get some right here. We'll go back up on top and kind of lay a little in, and then I'll come back with the flux and see if I can get. Now bear in mind this 100-watt iron's been sitting here for a while, and it's been kind of preheating this area a little bit, so it's not taking as long to normally, or as it would normally, to get this hot. And see, that brass doesn't really want to take that solder readily, so you've got to work with it. And it dropped off a little bit. So now what we'll do is let's just get a little bit of flux, and we take the flux on there, and that's going to cause that solder to run a little bit better. There we go. We're getting a little more penetration down into these cracks and crevices. There we go. Now I think, I don't know whether you can see this, along the bottom edge of the crown there, we're not doing that well, so let's get a little more heat. We'll come down here and just pick up a few pieces, there you go, of there, now it's starting to work. You got to, the temperature is real important here. This has got to get really hot. Okay, so there we go. That's actually and I got to do this all the way around this whole piece. Just around this edge, because this is where it's going to, the glass is going to attach. All right. Now, that's all there is to it. Let's heat that up for that final time there and kind of pool that solder just a little bit. And we got that section right there is actually pretty good. So we're getting it good and hot again. And you can see the flux burning off. That's going to be good enough right there. That's probably going to work. Okay, one last thing, and then we'll shut this video off. It's real important if you're ever going to do this kind of stuff to wear some protective gloves. And maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I burned my finger real bad. Let me get so I can see in the camera here. I burned this finger here real bad. Well, it's okay. You know, you heal up after a while. And anyway, that caused me a lot of grief, that particular problem. So I wore these gloves today, thinking, you know, I don't want to burn my hand. And I had 3 soldering irons going here at one time. One of them fell. I reached over to grab what I thought was a handle, and there's where the soldering iron came, right across there on this leather glove, and right across there. If I had not had this glove on, I would have had a very, very severe burn right there. So these soldering irons can be dangerous, and particularly if you got 3 or 4 of them going, it can get really rough. Well, anyway, that's this little bit of video here, and I'll go all the way around this thing just the same way, and we'll turn around and do the inside. So let me grab my phone out of this holder, and there we go. So anyway, that's the whole setup right there. I'm just doing it on a piece of wood. I've got a couple of rolls of solder holding it up, and a little bit drips on the floor, no big deal. We'll catch most of this solder here at $20, $25 a pound wholesale. You don't want too much of that running away from you. Anyway, now that looks a little cobbed up and ugly, but it isn't going to make any difference because we're going to solder the glass and branches to that, and then that'll be patinaed, so you won't see that silver, and it'll blend right in to the top of the lamp. But I wanted to show this evolution here and this part of it because it's certainly part of getting the work done. I'll get this thing tinned in the next hour and a half or 2 hours, and then I'm thinking now I'm going to go ahead and put it on top of the lamp and see about attaching the branches and glass to it. So we'll see how that works out. Anyway, thank you. I appreciate it. Bye.